Call to order the City Council work session for City of East Grand Forks for October 24th, 2017. Will City Clerk, please call roll.
Mayor Steve Gander.
Here.
Council President Mark Olson.
Here.
Council Vice President Chad Grassel. Council Members Clarence Fetter.
Here.
Mike Pakshavinsky.
Here.
Tim Rienthal.
Here.
Henry Tweeten.
Here.
Mark Demers.
Does term quorum. First off, Chief Hedlund swearing in an officer. There.
Officer Luke Tashuk is our newest officer, and he brings us up to full strength for the first time in quite a while.
Grab the microphone,
Oh,
please.
yes.
Thank you.
Officer Luke Tashuk, as I mentioned, and his hiring brings us to full strength. Now we just need to get them fully trained, and then we'll be in great shape. But we're certainly, it's a nice step in the right direction. So we're going to do the law enforcement oath of honor, followed by the law enforcement oath of office. So please raise your right hand and repeat after me. On my honor, I will never betray my badge, my integrity, my character, or the public trust. I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for our actions. I will always uphold the Constitution, my community, and the agency I serve. It's the law enforcement oath of honor, and we'll do the oath of office. I state your name.
I, Luke Tashuk,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
and the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of the office of
the duties of the office of
Police Officer for the City of East Grand Forks,
Police Officer for the City of East Grand Forks,
County of Polk,
County of Polk,
State of Minnesota,
State of Minnesota,
according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
according to
According to the best of my ability, so help me God.
the best of my abilities, so help me God. Thank you.
Congratulations. Okay, we'll move on now. And number one, consider awarding the wastewater pond decommissioning project, Mr. Emery.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before we start, I had one of my fellow engineers out of our Baxter office who worked, I guess, hand in hand with me on this project, and I'd like to actually get him on a conference call also.
Hello, Mark here.
Hey, Mark, Steve.
Steve.
Okay, so we're just going to get started here now, Mark. So, again, thank you, Mr. President. So on September 20th, we received 2 bids for the wastewater pond decommissioning projects. The project, again, was bid as a lump sum project. Therefore, we have spent a fair amount of time reviewing the bids and the biosolids dewatering management plans that were submitted with the bid. Also, I think, as I mentioned, the first time we brought this to the council is we did hold a pre-bid meeting on the project with a site visit upon completion of the pre-bid meeting. Again, just wanted to make sure all the contractors had a clear understanding of the scope of work, and there really were going to be no questions. And then with the bid, we did require the contractor, again, like I said, to submit a biosolids dewatering management plan, which is basically a plan how he was going to dewater the biosolids, how he would deal with the effluent from those dewatered biosolids. And then we also required the contractor to complete a biosolids field review form, stating that they had basically did all the necessary investigation that they needed to determine the amount of biosolids in the primary and secondary ponds. So we did require those items with the bid. So with that, like I said, we did have a lump sum bid. We did have discussion with the apparent low bidder to assure that they have a clear understanding of the scope of scope of work, including conversations with the general contractors type 4 certified operators. We also did, which is one big component of this project, we did discuss with the general contractor the requirements of having an approved stormwater pollution prevention plan, which is going to kind of work hand in hand with, again, their biosolids dewatering. And we further had numerous conference calls, and that's why I brought Mark Hallen into this conversation too. Mark's, like I said, out of our Baxter office, just blocks from the MPCA office. So Mark Hallen actually went over, sat down with MPCA. Sherry Bach is the gal that we've been dealing with, Sherry Bach, and Stark, I can't think of his last name or his first name right now, but again, just to review basically the results from the 30 composite samples that we had obtained in January of last year. And again, just to assure that all of these biosolids would be able to be land applied on site over essentially that 2-year contract period. So with that, again, we received 2 bids. Basically, the apparent low bidder at this time is Bursky Excavating with a bid amount of $4,419,300. The second bidder is $4,877,903. So a difference of approximately, $460,000 roughly. Again, like I told you at the last meeting, we wanted to go back, do our homework, review the bids, visit with the MPCA just to make sure that everyone was clear and we didn't have any unexpected changes as we went into this project, which we did do. So I guess at this point I'll open it up for questions, or if you have anything to add, Mark, based on your discussions with MPCA.
Nothing at this time, Steve. We'll see what the questions are. Just a quick note, you have noted biosolids testing of last year. The testing were from January of 2017, which would be this year.
Yep.
Anything else, Steve?
So no, like I said, we, upon our review, we would make the recommendation to award the contract to Bursky Excavating.
Questions that I do have for you, sir, just for clarify
Yep.
for me. When the bids were done and the parameters were set, did both companies have the same parameters? And I'm assuming, since you guys had meetings with them, that each one of them had the same one.
That's correct. Yep.
So when the bid was done, it was on the same parameters.
That's correct.
And then when you guys went back to review them, you made sure that the parameters that were given to them, they bid the correct parameters of what was being done.
Yeah, there was questions on basically, the nitrogen loading rate, which we've reviewed with MPCA. And again, in the second low bidder, it's stated clearly in his biosolids dewatering management plan that their bid is takes into account leaving all the biosolids in place, which was always the intention. We wouldn't have to remove these biosolids from the site. So it was made clear in, the second bidder's dewatering management plan that they bid it to leave the materials on site.
Yeah. Henry, I know you have something.
Steve, during any of this period of time, did you make any contact with the pollution control agency when a representative of the R.J. Zabel firm wasn't present? Has there been any phone conversations between you and the pollution control when a representative of this firm was not present?
Yeah, we had many discussions after the bid with Minnesota Pollution Control Agency just to verify all of the requirements, and Zabel's weren't involved in those conversations.
My question is, let's see, once you got along and there was questions on the bid, did you have any, and you made number of phone conversations with pollution control, am I correct?
That's correct, Henry.
And the question is, one of the questions is the nature of the bid and conditions and so forth, right?
Yep.
That's constant. But did you did you have one of the representatives of that firm with you so that it was clarified as to what pollution control was going to insist on as far as policy, regulations, call it what you might mean?
Any of the conversations, Henry, we've had since the bid, I mean, we did not have Zavrel's
Before
involved
the
in it.
before the bid, did you have conversations?
No.
Did you have any representatives of the Zavrel firm talk to you about questions of information at all?
The question of the nitrogen loading rate did come up probably about 3, 4 o'clock the night before the bid.
All right.
You know, we did basically tell them they're going to have to bid it how they see it. And again, they were very clear in their bid that, you know, there is a possible issue with the nitrogen loading rate. However, their bid was based on those materials staying on site and reusing those materials on site, which is how Bursky Excavating bid it too. So again, I feel that we got an apples to apples bid here.
Mr. President, I'd like to.
Hang on a second, I have a couple questions, just so that everybody knows too that I get where you're going, Mr. Tweeden, but also same question to him is that
Yeah.
is Bursky's, were they supposed to be in the room anyway when they're talking to MPCA? No. That wasn't the intent and that wasn't the discussion that was going on. Right. So it wasn't something that Mr. Emery or WSN did or was trying to do anything that's not above board or anything like that. So I don't like the accusation or the way you're going at accusing WSN of doing something. I don't like that.
All I want to know is what happened if there was confusion as to the bidding.
I understand.
I've been
You
around
could have
a
left it
long
at that.
time on questioning people for,
So
you understand that. You have representatives.
I understand that too, but the mayor wants to speak before we move on to other people, sir. Go ahead, Mayor.
And my one question is, I know they had the same specs, they had the same parameters, and they got to bid accordingly. Inside of that, does anyone feel that there was some ambiguity in what was proposed or in the the request for work? Does anyone feel that even though they both had the same parameters, the same package, that there was some ambiguity there that you couldn't know, and put them in a bad spot?
I don't think so. Again, we had, we did the pre-bid meeting. We issued an addendum after that pre-bid meeting. I think answered a lot of questions, provided information that the contractors were looking for to help them develop their bid. So, I don't know.
Thank you.
Does anybody on the council have any other questions? If not, I'm assuming you want to speak, sir?
I'd like to.
You can come up to the mic, state your name, please.
Sure.
for the record.
I'm Dan Zavrel, Assistant Secretary Treasurer with RJ Zavrel and Sons. I was one of the main guys that put our bid together for this project. As you all know, it was a difficult one to put together with the lump sum and unknowns with the site conditions for the biosolids. That being said, we have a couple of questions I guess we would like to see if Steve or Mark can shed some light on. When we had heard that the award or recommendation was going to come out tonight, I had talked to Steve earlier today at our weekly meeting, and we had just had a brief discussion, and he had mentioned that through the discussions with the MPCA, they had agreed or they had acquiesced to maybe reducing some of their calculation factors, which are, there's a long set of formulas that a person runs through when you're doing a land application, site application. So we went through the data that was given in the application. I plugged it into a spreadsheet that I've created. I'm a Type 4 land applier, been a Type 4 operator for 15 years. So when we had run through that calculation, the addendum came out on, I believe it was like the Thursday or Friday before the bid, and the addendum number 1 changed the mano rate from 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre down to 50 pounds per acre, which is a significant decrease in, you know, the ability to, the amount of material that you can place on there depending on how the composition of the biosolids. We went through the calculations. We didn't quite believe them ourselves. We had somebody else go through them, and we came up with the same situation, is that the constraints of the project that say all the biosolids had to be left on site, and the ruling from the MPCA for the 50 pounds of nitrogen mano limit, those two conflicted with each other. And in our dewatering report, the one item F that we put at the end of it, we had stated that the two constraints together are unattainable for the project given the current biosolids conditions. Further input would be necessary from the MPCA to approve these constraints. And then we did say that we based our proposal on putting all the material on the site because that was the one constraint in the contract that we felt was as solid as it could be, and the 2 cropping seasons. With my conversation with Steve this morning, you know, again, he said that they had maybe relaxed the table constraints, which there's a couple of different tables there based on what types of biosolids there are. They're either anaerobically digested, primary stabilized waste like we have, composted waste, different things like that. All those go into a mathematical formula which generate the amount of nitrogen that this sample of biosolids is going to have. The one that we used, which we feel is the correct one, is the one for primary or stabilized secondary waste, which has a factor of 8. So when you put the factor of 8 in there, it basically takes the amount of nitrogen in there times 8, and then, you know, it increases it. Now, when we had talked this morning, Steve had mentioned that had been reduced to 6. Well, that's basically, you know, reducing it by 400%. So that's allowing way more material to be placed on site.
Yep. Say, Dan, can I just clarify? It
Yes.
was MPCA allowed us to reduce it to 2, not 6.
Oh, sorry.
2.
Sorry, all the way down to 2.
Yep.
Sorry about that. So then, if you use a secondary factor with, I'm assuming if they reduced it to 2, that would meant they were assuming that this is composting. There's another table that's further down the road that determines the carryover nitrogen, which will be effective in the second year. That will limit the amount of biosolids that go on there. Well, now that one gets reduced as well, to me, if that was a change that was made afterward, that is a material enough change that it is almost the same of change as the addendum that was put out the week before the bid. Now, that change doesn't change the fact that we wrote we would try to do this job in 2 years and we would leave all the biosolids on site, but that has a material effect on the amount of work that would go into reducing that material, triple, quadruple handling it to try to land apply it in separate different sections to be able to get through the cropping seasons. So our feeling is, you know, with addendum number 1 calling out the sludge management rules, 7,041 or whatever, it's pretty clear in that state section that stabilized primary and waste activated sludge should be used with the 8 multiplication factor and the other 10 multiplication factor. So by reducing that to the 2 multiplication factor for the composting, I think it's our opinion that requires a lot less work than what was in the bid and underneath what would normally be associated with this type of biosolids. I think it's a big enough a change that at least there should have been a conversation with, I think, both bidders at that point, not just the low bidder, but both bidders to understand that there's going to be changes here, and there could be other work, or there could be less work involved, and there might be a chance for there's a reduction in cost. I appreciate your time.
You want to address any of those, Mr. Emery?
So do you, Mark, want to provide any, I guess, input there on, your discussions with MPCA and Sherry Stark and how essentially we arrived at that factor of 2?
All right, to the points Dan raised, can you hear me okay, Steve?
Yep, we can hear you good.
All right, to the points of the nitrogen application rates and everything, the contract documents, like I say, we started out at 200. The MPCA talked to us, Sherry Bach. We changed that down to 50. And, ultimately that doesn't, as the biosolids are all windrowed and dewatered, it doesn't change the amount of material that's being moved for this project. All right, but it, from that standpoint, because whether you have a factor, the biosolids are what the biosolids are, and then looking at the type of, the application for seeding and everything. What Dan is referring to is how many times does the material have to be moved? And I guess that's, right now we're looking at is if we apply a 2-factor, from this versus an 8-factor. But I mean, nobody questioned that during the pre-bid conference, and but not that I'll say they needed to, but if that was a question as far as putting their bid together and how often they had to move stuff around, from that aspect, wasn't asked. So. The project, then discussing with Steve Stark, the hydrogeologist, and Sherry Bach with the MPCA, they looked at the data. They looked at both, they had requested both management plans with contractors' names removed and everything, so they had no name information. Then after those discussions, the 50 pounds per acre, right? That's the application for the nitrogen. As far as table 2, whether you pick a factor of 2, 4, 6, or 8 on the sludge type, that, as Dan said, that's one of the calculations. The MPCA, they looked at all the information and for the 30 results. As Steve, I had to do a lot of work with the labs because they questioned the organic solids versus the total solids, and they had us confirm information. I sent them the information I had actually collected from the ponds. When I took my samples and sent to Georgia Dufresne. So after they worked through that, then they came back and said, they confirmed with us that an application or the factor of 2 would be applicable to what they're seeing with the makeup of those solids. So, gentlemen, like I say, for the standpoint of moving material around, what Dan is referring to, I guess, if the information was known that based on the calculations he submitted or revising, he's saying that, well, I only have to move the dirt 3 times instead of times 4, 12 times. From that, but they're still not moving it off site, and so that's the question what he's raising. Would it substantially? And Steve and I talked this. If they'd had that information put in the bid, all the biosolids are staying on site. We're not trucking them 20 miles away, and based on their management plans that they submitted. I don't know how, whether they were applying at a rate of 2 or applying at a rate of 8. I guess, their biosolids management plan doesn't specifically state, okay, we have to go back and that means we have to reapply 4 times, 8 times on same property or on the same area that we planted in 2018 and 2019. So Steve, I guess, like I say, for the, from the standpoint of, as I've discussed, with the MPCA, from the standpoint of the changing that during the bidding process, we went from, the MPCA looked at the 200 rate versus the 50 rate. Reid, nobody addressed the type of biosolids that would be expected to be used in the calculations. That question was never asked, at any time during the bidding, that we were asked to identify that as far as, contractors putting their bids together.
Dan, you want to address that, sir?
Oh, yeah, I would like to. I guess based on my calculations, which I submitted with our dewatering plan. I think we had, I think it was, originally it was like 89 wet tons per acre is what could be placed on that material, using the factor of 8 and the original items. This morning I went back and looked at it after I had my conversation with Steve, and I believe that number jumps up into the 300 tons per acre. So the fact that, you know, Mark's saying we don't have to move that material twice or whatever, well, you would, because you were only able to land apply so much, because otherwise you'll exceed the limit. Then you'll have to have a cropping season on that. Then you'll have to retest the soil, and then you'll have to use the carryover nitrogen from the previous year and do your calculations again, and then you'll have to do another land application. You can't just land apply all of this on there because you're exceeding the nitrogen rate in 1 year. You know, so to go from a factor of 8 to a factor of 2, that's a 4 times factor. So I think I don't know if Steve had my original document there, but I think it was 60-some or 80-some tons per acre, wet tons per acre at the end. But the new one is up in the almost 300, and so, you know, that's a large difference of the material that you can place. It's the same work, mind you, that you still have to put it out there, you still have to farm it, but you don't have to have a crop, get rid of a crop, get the ground ready again, put another one on, do that again. So I think it is a difference in the constraints of the project.
So my question for you, Dan, now, just ask it is, if I'm understanding correctly, from the factor of 8 to 2, would that change the amount of the dollar amount that you bid on?
Yes.
The dollar amount.
Yes.
So that's what I'm trying to get to, the end point of, really, if we're going through all this, and would it affect the $400,000 difference? Would it be down 400, or would it be down 500,000, or would it be down 600? You know, I'm just wondering in my head, if you've done that calculation already, what it would be then.
We did it before we came here. And what we had in our bid for liquidated damages and the additional seeding and the additional working, it would have been a tie.
The only question I guess I have, Dan, is, you know, you basically say our proposal is based on applying all of the biosolids on the current cell areas in 2 cropping seasons, regardless of the nitrogen content.
Right.
So again, you based your proposal on leaving it all on site, and your bid, you put together your bid, like you said, regardless of the nitrogen
Right.
content.
And I think
so.
What we're trying to explain that today too, because the conversation we had before the bid, you know, I called you the night before with the 50 pounds, and you just chased me over to Mark, and I talked to Mark a little bit on that, and he didn't have a good answer other than that it's going to be at 50 pounds of nitrogen, you know. So we had a conversation. How are we supposed to bid this then? You know, I mean, it's not possible to do the project. And when I called you that morning, I said the same thing to you too, basically. I'm like, our calculations are telling us you can't leave all the soil on site and meet the manna rate at the same time. And Steve's like, well, you're just going to have to put your bid in. Like he said earlier, you're going to have to put your bid in and put whatever you need to put on it to do that. So we made the decision to add liquidated damages and additional seeding year to our proposal. And then we talked about what are we going to do with this biomanagement plan, because our plan's all laid out in a 2-year cycle. So we said, what's the worst case scenario for us? We put down in there that we're going to do it in 3 years, so we're not even meeting the project requirements when we turn in our proposal. Or do we put in a proposal with a number that has a schedule that meets the requirements, knowing that we're probably not going to make it, and we cover it on the liquidated damage end of it? And we went with putting in a proposal that met the schedule, knowing that we'd have to cover the liquidated damages on the backside. And I think one of the only reasons that we tried to put the liquidated damages in there were because of the 2 certification pages that were with this project. You know, it's a lump sum project, and there's 2 certification pages in there. And we feel that those certification pages, if you read between the lines on them, were laid out specifically for no change orders on this project. There was going to be, all the risk was on the contractor at this point, and there was no risk being assumed by the city. So we made the decision to put a proposal in that met the project schedule, and we put the pricing in there to know that we weren't going to meet that because of the application rates.
So I'm 100% clear. When it was known that the application rate changed, that was found out after all bids were in, correct?
Dan did bring it to our attention basically the night before. We had a conversation probably 3, 4, or 5 o'clock the night before. Again, at that point, it's too late to put out an addendum. So, I mean, we just told them we're going to have to bid it based on the 50 pounds nitrogen loading rate.
Right.
You know.
So it was out there in the wind, nobody had really committed to it, or had they, to the higher application rates?
Well, I think that's where the confusion sets in is the manna rate is what we're limited by, and that changed from 200 to 50.
Okay.
And that was in the addendum. I'm assuming we both knew about it. But since the bid was let, there's been discussions with the MPCA that have seemed to relax the charts that are used to do the calculations.
Right.
So the application rate doesn't change.
Correct.
But
The
the amount
multiplier
of material
Yep.
that you can put on does, because the application rate is based on the amount of nitrogen versus the amount of weight of material.
When that second change came, that was after everyone had to have their bids in, right?
After which change came?
The second change that allowed them to go back to putting more on.
But that's just what we've heard that came out of
Yeah.
the discussions. That was never,
Yeah.
Those were based on discussions afterwards with our
Yeah.
review of MPCA and stuff.
What I'm trying to get to is, did either contractor have access to that bit of information ahead of the other?
No.
Nope.
I guess, Steve, can I?
Go ahead, Mark.
All right. I guess just so what Zavrel used in their calculations, out of the table on page 142, of chapter 10 of the from the MPCA, right? They for the factor 2, they selected, in their calculations that they were working with, they selected a factor of 8, which is stabilized, primary, and waste activated. Now, and they had to pick. They selected a number based on their experience or what they wanted. But what I'm offering is that number that they used to calculate. That's nothing that we did not. Nobody questioned that at the pre-bid conference. And right, I mean the MPCA. Nobody gave any guidance. WSN and the MPCA on which factor should be used there. So everybody understands when Zavrel was calculating that they were conservative. So they said, okay, we'll use the number 8 because it can only go down from there. I guess as the bidder, that's a decision they made in putting their bid together. And I can't tell you what the other bidder did when they were looking at it, but that's the decision they made, to do that. And I say, and because Dan's correct, when he raised the question the night before, and I did not have a solid answer for him on how the MPCA would be looking at the factors on page 142 of the calculations. So, and Steve, as you know, in our conversations with the MPCA, my sit down, they actually went back and forth twice on that, for factor 2 in that table. And then, in our last discussions with them after they reviewed more of the lab testing data and became more comfortable with it, then they said, as this project proceeds with the City of East Grand Forks, the factor of 2 could be used, as the contractors now actually start sampling the biosolids after they've dewatered them, because that's the data they'll actually be basing the application rates and everything on, is after stuff has been, after the biosolids have been farmed and dewatered according to their biosolids management plans.
But Mark, I think the issue with the table and which number was chosen is the fact that this waste is actually primary and secondary stabilized waste, which the chart calls out as the factor of 8. It's not composted waste. Even after the year that you work it or leave it in a pile or whatever, it's still not a composted waste.
Well, you say, I mean, you know, a certain, I mean, well, you know, the ponds have been in operation since the late 1950s. So, you know, and and that's, they say that it's showing, you know, the percent, you know, essentially the percent of organic solids, you know, was typically down just in the low teens you know, compared to the, you know, the total percent solids of it, you know, and that, like saying that indicating, you know, well reduced, you know, volatile organics and well broken down, you know, you know, and that's what the MPCA looked at after they, you know, now they say that was for everybody's information interpretation. So, I mean, you know, Dan, it would have been good if that discussion had came up during the pre-bid conference. You know, what are we looking at here? And you know, nobody raised the question, so we didn't go to the MPC at that time as far as, you know, what factors should bidders be considering as they're looking at this.
One question to clarify too for me is, what factor did the Berskey use? I mean, did they use 8 or did they use 2?
That we don't know because these calculations that Dan did require, I mean, they weren't required to be submitted with the bid.
I just wanted to make sure. I didn't know.
Yep.
Well, we're a type 4 operator. We follow the state law, and that's what the law said. That's what you had to do. You couldn't do it the way Mark suggested. You couldn't. It would have been good if MPCA would have ruled in earlier before the bid. Everybody had a level playing field, but we didn't. That's all we're saying. We don't feel the playing field was level.
And Berskey Excavating does have certified Type 4 operators on board. I know the one that we visited with, I think he's been a Type 4 certified operator since 1984, I think is what he told us, so he was very competent.
I just want
Mark a Type 4 operator?
What's that?
Is Mark a Type 4 operator?
Mark is not a Type 4 operator, but no.
So, you know, I mean, these guys go to class and they got to take a test and they're certified by the state. And they have to follow the state statute. And that's what we follow. Now it changed. All we're saying, there was a change. We just feel that we should have been, you know, somehow we just don't feel right.
So, Mr. Zavro, Peter, what are you asking for then? I guess that's what
We just think that it should be rebid, opened up. We think the city will save money. Maybe we won't get the bid. I'm not saying that. Verse might not. But when you have a clear parameters and other contractors know, maybe that's why you didn't get so many bids, because it wasn't very clear. So you might, you know, I would think you have an opportunity there to at least come out the same where you're at or lower. You might, you know, that's the way we were looking at it. So.
And all I will say, Pete, is I mean, when the project was bid, Berskey had the same information that you guys had. Berskey didn't know that MPCA was going to allow them to use the type or the 2-factor or whatever. So, I think
goes
we're
to the point that if he
I think we're playing the same
the
field.
right formulas, then he gets the same answer that I do, and you can't land apply it all on there. So, I mean, that's kind of the point.
But again, Dan, I mean, you come out and say that your proposal is based on applying all the biosolids on the current cell areas. So again, you didn't come back
permission
and
from the MPC.
when you calculated that, then you didn't start figuring that I'm going to haul this many tons of biosolids off site. I mean, you still bid it to leave all the material on site the same way as Berskey.
Right.
So
Just
that's
over
where
a
I'm
long-
saying
just
I
over
think
a longer
we
period
got
of time.
apples to apples bid.
Just over a longer period of time, because you still can't do it. in
You
the
said over
2-year
2
time.
cropping seasons, which again, it was clear in the spec that this was going to occur over 2 cropping seasons.
Right, which we told you that we took into account.
Anybody else have any questions on this at all? Mr. Tweeten?
I've been involved in the bidding process since the early 60s, East Grand Forks, and one thing that we've always have done is wanted to have fair, open bidding. There's no way that I can vote to award this bid. The thing that happens is that, as I see it, this bid is technical, and if there was some questions on it, why all prospective bidders should have signed a document that would indicate that they will bid based upon these explanations, and it's a confusing deal. So as far as I'm concerned, everybody's had a chance to speak, council members and so forth. I'm going to move that we reject any and all bids, and that it be rebid, and that all prospective bidders sign a document to indicate that you have no further questions, and there should be a pre-bid conference before, if it takes more than one, have it so that we get clarity. Now, the water and light, which I'm part of, we bid many types of situations and many fact situations, but it comes down when we're public servants, we've got the requirement that we act fairly, and I think the fairest thing is start over. We've rebid through the years, and I'd take a second to that.
Mayor Gander.
I think we're all clear that tonight was a night of fact-finding. We're not taking any action as for voting yes or no. So it would go to the council a week from today for that action that Mr. Tweeten is requesting. And I would hope that in the meantime, and I don't know, maybe we could get a general agreement. It's beyond an engineering question or an excavating question. It becomes a legal question of what then triggers a rebid, right? What hits the switch that says now you really should rebid this? I'm not clear on that. That's outside my pay grade. But I would like maybe Mr. Galstad or someone else who's expert in contracts like this to say, again, what triggers a rebid? Was this development that came as to the 8-to-2 ratio enough to really mandate that or not? And so I guess I would ask for that legal opinion, you know, even during the week, so we'd have that to consider before our final decision on Tuesday.
Oh, sorry. Monday, no meeting on Tuesday. I mean,
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
no.
The following one. My bad.
Mr. Galstad, I don't know if you want to address that, just saying what you can do or not do, or what you,
Well, what I'll do is I'll provide.
want to slide the mic down to you,
A
please?
general law memo on it. If I'm being requested, what I'll do is I'll provide a legal memorandum on competitive bidding, so to speak, for your review, and then you can vote your conscience at the next session.
Mr. Murphy.
What's the time for award of the bid?
Well, we had it in the bid specs. I think we could hold the bids for 60 days, so we opened bids on September 21st, did I say? September 20th, so bids should be good till about the end of November, so.
Anybody, you okay with that, Mr. Vitter? Mr. Botchminski? Mr. Riepel?
Yes.
Okay. All good. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the discussion.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. We're going to hang up on you.
Yep, thank you, gentlemen.
That night. Okay, we'll move on to number 2, request to apply for local road improvement funding. Mr. Emery.
MnDOT is currently accepting applications for the LRIP Local Road Improvement Program, funding program, until November 3rd for state aid cities. This program will provide funding for construction costs up to a maximum requested amount of $1 million. Right now, they are taking requests for construction years 2018 to 2020. This program does fund construction costs only. They do not fund engineering right-of-way costs. So one idea, one option that was kind of thrown out there to me is that this program could be utilized as a potential funding source for the roundabout construction on Bigland Road and Reinhardt Drive. So I guess what we're looking for is if the city is interested in pursuing this funding program, we would just need a resolution from the city. And then if we are able to get any letters of support from any public, private entities. That would only strengthen our application. And I did talk to Megan last week about that, and if desired, she could have the resolution completed, and we could approve that at the special meeting on October 30th. So, I guess opening up for questions.
I do have one question on here. Just hang on, Henry, please. So construction year is 2018 to 2020. And if we don't do it at that time, we lose the money, and we can't. And for us to go back and apply for the grant again is probably not going to look too favorable, right? So,
No. And I think on this one, I mean, if we did apply for it, I think the earliest we would apply for would be probably a construction year 2019, because we all know some of the right-of-way acquisition that we may need there. I know Water and Light has some major electrical work that they would have to relocate. So, again, if we were going to go after this, I would specify 2019, 2020 construction year, just to allow us to get the right-of-way and any utility relocations completed.
And does the next federal sub-target drop in?
2022.
So if it's up to $1 million, so we could get 500, we could get 400, we could get 300. It's up to $1 million.
It's up to $1 million. I don't remember, but I think we were a little over $1 million just on construction costs, if I remember right. So again, based on our construction costs, I would hope we would, if we were fortunate, we'd probably be up in that close to $1 million range.
There's not like a ratio to look at your costs for this is 1.5 million. We're going to give you 20% or 40% of it or 50%. I don't know
what
if you've had
exactly
experience with it or anybody else has had experience with it.
Typically, it's based on the projects that are requested. If they get 4 requested and there's 3 of them at 200,000, oftentimes they'll look at how many they can fund. If there's 3 that come in and they're all $1 million plus, then they look at worthiness. Really is all dependent on who applied.
Okay.
And if they give you a certain amount that is a bit less than what you've requested, it wouldn't hurt if you just stated that you're not going to.
Turn that down.
You would turn it down
Okay.
because it just isn't something that's viable.
I didn't know.
Then I want to make perfectly clear, if it isn't clear, because Carla had those questions, this is a grant that has federal dollars in it, even though it's through the state. So you cannot take your local share, your whatever is not included. Let's say if the project's $1.5 million and you get $1 million and there's still 500,000 left, you cannot offset it with city sub-target dollars because those are also federal dollars. So you can't offset your federal dollar, the remaining portion with another federal grant.
Can't double dip.
Yes, that's double. You can use state aid.
State aid
You
allocation
can
dollars.
use state aid, you can use state funds, different things like that. You cannot use a federal grant to offset the remaining portion of a federal grant. So, just to be clear.
I just wanted to make sure. I didn't know if I had any experience with it. Henry?
I'd like to make a comment with what would happen on a roundabout. I've seen a number of them. Is that when you go into an existing district like we have here, we will have to pay for removal of about 4 houses. We also, that's what will happen. And then you've got the gas station and loss of business, and the remaining houses around there have a possible cause of action for reduction of value of their houses. If you go down to an area or you go someplace like Grand Forks got one, that was done when there was all vacant land around it. Now they built an apartment house after the fact, but that's different. But I'm not going to vote for Reinhardt Drive. I don't care what you say. And frankly, you're going to get some heat from the people out there being next to that particular situation. Frankly, the thing that we should be doing, the highway department should be putting a light system in there, or ask for the highway patrol to come out there twice a day and direct traffic. it causes lots less trouble than what we're going through. The highway department, frankly, is not handling it, in my opinion, very well.
Anybody else have
In the
it?
city limits.
Does anybody else have anything on this?
I'm not against a roundabout, period. I'm against where they're contemplating for it. And these people that live along there, they all like it there. Some of them been officers of the senior center.
Okay. Mr. Riepel.
This amount too has to be earmarked for a specific project, correct? Correct. Okay.
Yep. Anybody else have any questions on that? If not, we'll move on.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. Number 3, discussion on Coulee View addition development. Mr. Galstad.
Well, essentially, this matter came up for the replat on the southern portion of the Coulee View, I guess, replat. Nancy wasn't around when because she was out of town on other business. I asked that the matter be tabled for further discussion. I've asked Megan and Nancy to put this matter on October 30th at this special meeting for discussion regarding issuing a variance to the PUD specifications based upon the layout of the property so that he could get in the ground. There was 2 reasons for it. That was the first reason. And the second reason was because there's some requirements that there need to be restrictive covenants on that property prior to Mr. Strauss selling the land. I did have a conversation with Mr. Neal. He told me that he'll have them available. He hasn't been in the office for me to be able to talk to him. I believe he's coming back tomorrow. I have left a couple of messages with his office staff and with a couple of the attorneys in the office over there that I need to have those available to me on Friday so that we can review them. So if the plat does go through, that we can actually have them recorded before the transfer on the property. When I talked to him the last time, he did say he had a staff member that was working on them presently. So this matter is going to be scheduled for October 30th at the same special hearing to be able to go through the parameters. The reason for it is since there are PUD private infrastructure restrictions for essentially sewer systems, I want to make sure that we have our reasons for going ahead and doing it documented ahead of time so that we don't run into presidential issues on the backside for other development.
Yep. Anybody have any questions for that?
Got that?
We will also have, and I've spoke with Mr. Strauss and his engineer on obtaining additional right-of-way, just to make sure we have that for a future roundabout and/or turning lanes, whatever we may need there. They are willing to allow us to take some right-of-way. We just want to make sure we know exactly what it is before we make the request, because I don't think he's particularly fond of giving a lot of it and then getting it back. So we'll have that information available and ready for the next Monday.
The only other thing that I was going to mention is did we want to make sure that it was either right-of-way or putting it as a potential easement? Because if it's an easement in a right-of-way or a roundabout doesn't go in there, just an easement is easier to vacate than a right-of-way on the road.
Either or.
Okay.
Mr. Strauss, do you have anything to add at all, sir?
Yeah, just a couple questions.
So if you want to come up to the microphone, please, sir.
Just in regards to the covenants, Ron?
Yep.
Or Nancy, can we make sure that, or can I write them down just to make sure we're on the same page, exactly what he wants? I know Gerard is out for an emergency, from what I'm told, and I did speak with one of his other lawyers in the firm today, and she did send me over a draft of it, and I looked it over and sent it to my partner and sent it back to her. So I do believe that he is going to review it in the morning and get it over to you as soon as possible, but I just want to make sure we're not wasting time and not putting things in we should have in there. From what I understand, the biggest thing is the private utility easement that is going underneath the street, and obviously down Midland Road, and basically protecting the city from any exposure to repair it, expense of that matter, and also the private drive.
Yeah, I don't have the information in front of me. I did provide, Gerard asked me for the information, and I sent over to him the specifics that were requested by the planning and zoning that were on the requirements for the plat. I emailed that to Gerard a week ago and said these were the requirements that they were looking at and the restrictions.
Okay.
But if you want to give me a copy of that, I could go over it with Nancy or have him call me in the morning. But essentially, you've just hit the highlights on what was required for that.
Yeah, it basically just addresses maintenance and responsibility for anything that is private.
Yep.
That would be used by the property owners and or public, as well as anything that is private that is within our public right-of-way, addressing the responsibility of maintaining it and repairs, and that if you had to dig up the road or if you had to work into our system for your private system, these people would be responsible for the costs associated with it.
Yep.
So it's just any maintenance and or responsibility of costs and repairs for anything that's private.
It just seemed like in the draft there was some excess material in there that
Yep.
didn't need to be covered in this particular covenant, but it will be on our covenants for the homeowners.
For the homeowners.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're not worried about party walls and those types of
Yeah,
things.
it wasn't that,
Yeah.
but it just seemed like there were some things that kind of
There are
irrelevant.
some things that are plat-specific related, like engineering related, we can strike those out. If
Okay.
you just send it over tomorrow.
Yeah, you should have it tomorrow
Like
if he gets in.
electronic drawings and or, those types of things, so.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr. Stubbs?
No, that's it.
Anybody else have any questions? Appreciate it. Thanks for all the work on it.
Thank you, Judd.
Number 4, discussion of proposed garage, rummage sale ordinance, Megan and Mr. Galstad.
Okay. Based on the last work session and the suggestions made by council, Ron put proposed ordinance together. No permitting process, limited to 3 per year. They can do 2 in a row, but then they would have to have a 45-day separation before they did their 3rd. Is this something you guys, any other suggestions from you? Otherwise, if you so choose, we can put it on for a first reading at the next meeting.
Good to me. Looks good. Anybody else have any, Mike, you have questions, sir?
2 questions. I know some people have garage sales that start at 7.
That's all what you want. We can change it to 7.
I guess 8 o'clock is, I guess I would say 7 o'clock would be okay for most neighborhoods, but, and then this limits it to 3 per year. We were talking about 4.
I did receive from a council member 3 exactly. That was the only real.
Okay. Only real direction you got?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you want that to be changed, it's something that can be changed.
I mean, I'd say, to me, 4 would be okay, but whatever the majority wants, I'll settle.
3 or 4, Tim? Matter?
3. Don't matter.
Doesn't matter.
I'll go 3.
Clarence? Mark?
Way beyond my expertise.
It's pretty simple.
3 or 4?
3, I don't care.
Okay, whatever, that's fine.
Anything else, sir?
No.
Mark?
Thank you. Wondering how we intend to enforce it? Is the enforcement going to come through PD, or is that through planning or code enforcement? Your code enforcement?
I guess at this point in time, until we start getting phone calls, just let people operate the way they have, and then once we start getting phone calls between the administration and Nancy's office.
Typically, when we receive a complaint, they all come to me anyways.
So
and then I work with the police, so.
Send out a letter.
Whoever gets the complaint will deal with it, so.
Typically, then if they wouldn't abide by that, then they would most likely, you send up a letter or whatever, and you talk to the police, and if they don't abide by that, then they can be cited by the police if they keep it going. That's typically how it works.
Typically, the letters, I would have to send certified, and by that time, who knows? I would assume that sending the police out there, if we've got, it's not hard for me if I receive a call that says these people are having a garage sale, I stop over and remind them that they can't have one again for one or whatever.
So, but you're going to be in charge of
Or I don't
then
want to be in
compiling, no, but I'm just, part of this is not a per incident, it's not like a noise ordinance where there's an issue at that acute time, go over and take care of it. This is a progressive issue, right? So
Yeah.
someone has to maintain the documentation, the chain of evidence, if that's the right terminology, but is that in your department?
Well, I guess, what are you expecting? Are you expecting me on Fridays to drive around looking for garage sales?
I'm not expecting anything, I'm just
No,
trying to.
that's what I'm saying, is that
If we don't-
I mean, if you're wondering how we're gonna monitor it, I guess I don't know, other than on a complaint-driven basis.
So if there is a complaint, would the police go over, take a photo, some sort of timestamp? Is that how it would normally be done?
Probably, yeah, we could do an incident report, record that they were having a garage sale on that particular date, and again, that's, the enforcement and monitoring is the most challenging aspects of this.
I guess I would suggest probably the best way to keep track of it would be then for Nancy to talk, or whoever, talk to the police department, get an ICR in it, because the ICRs can be easily searched in their database, so you'd be able to check and see when they had their last.
The problem is, by the time someone complains about it, it's probably at least their third already.
Yep.
And it's somewhat similar to when we get a complaint about a vehicle that's parked over 24 hours on the road. We need to be able to prove that before we can actually tow the vehicle. So once we get the complaint, it's probably already been there for 24 hours. We tag it, they now have another 24 hours.
Yep.
So unfortunately, if that's the route we want to take for this, they're probably going to have 5 or 6 before any enforcement action, whatever vehicle we take.
So there's your 4.
You got it.
That's good.
You got your
I'm all
4.
good, I'm all good.
And I think that if ordinances are important, and if you don't understand or at least consider how you're going to enforce it, it's not worth doing. So, to me, it seems a little bit, it's a bad word, but sloppy in how we're looking at enforcing it. It's kind of like a wink.
This is why I kind of wanted a permit process, so then I could have that documentation saying this person had it on this day, so if somebody called, I could verify, yes, they have, or if they haven't been calling in.
That's whether they get the permit or not.
That's
If
right,
they
you'd have the
no
same
permit-
problem, people having sales without permits, how do you know that they're having one?
At least it would help someone.
Well, I don't think it would make any difference. I think it would be like dog licenses, most people don't get them.
But we do, when we run into people that don't have a dog license, they do get sick.
Is there some way you could do an online registration through the city's website, so they could just go on and simply register their garage sale?
I'd vote against that.
think
I don't want a
if you have
permit system.
problem, the person bringing up the problem is going to help you police it.
That's what I was gonna
Yeah,
say.
neighbors are gonna call.
Believe me, if somebody's complaining about it, they've got pictures and documentation. It's almost always the case. So.
Good. I like it.
Neighbor
It's a good
versus
start,
neighbor.
and if enforcement is really, really hard, we can tweak it.
Okay. Anyone else have anything? No, thank you, Nelson. Megan? All right, move on to number 5, request for winter equipment lease. Mr. Stordahl.
Thank you, Mr. President. Each year, the city, through the Public Works Department, leases a motor grader. For the snow season, the following quotes that are put in front of you I got for leasing machine, based on previous year's hours that we put on per month. I feel that, I guess it's my recommendation to go with the Butler machine lease, and that's what I'm asking for approval for.
Anybody have a question? Mr. Reed Bell.
How many hours did you actually put on per month? Did you have an estimate on that?
Yeah, each year it's drastically different.
Right.
Last year, from November to December, we had about almost 70. December to January, 40. And then the other 3 months, we had 0 that we put on it. That zeros, that's, I guess, not typical, but, you know, usually other years that I'm looking at here, 25, maybe 25 a month. And then there's some oddball years where you have 25, and then you have like a 78 or something. So it's never really the same. I've been trying to keep track of an average, so we kind of have a ballpark, you know, because you always have the outliers, but.
25 is your break-even point for.
Yeah,
both
probably. But a lot of times, yeah, the early months and late months, you might have very low, 7 hours, 0, something.
I'd like to make a comment.
Jimmy, you're done?
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
I'd like to make a comment. I think that our commissioner's doing an extra job on it. And he's got backup people also in the event we had a big blizzard. And it's very, very important that the streets get opened up quickly. We want to get as much normalcy as we can so people can go to work. We also have the question of rescue for people who have heart attacks. And he's got a new push machine, which he should show the council. He can clean parking lots and downtown streets. It's a labor-saving deal. He's waited a long time to get it, and we have the personnel. I hope everybody takes a look at it. This parking lot will be cleaned quick, and we can haul the snow out at some later date. So he's well organized. I know that because I'm downtown early.
Okay, anybody else have anything?
I just have a question for Jason. Is it going to be available for Thursday?
Friday morning, actually.
No, it won't, but
And
we'll have to make do.
And can you clarify who has the backup contract? Who helps you out?
Oh, it's different every year. We have kind of a list that we go down and there's usually about 3 people on there. A lot of times it's, the local ones are usually RJ's Averill, and there's Gowans that do some of it. Sometimes there's some local snow removal businesses also. We've had to, in cases where there was nobody available, we've had to take from some smaller contractors too. So our backup list includes, it may include 3 to 5
Okay, I didn't.
a snow season. Yeah, and they're always maybe different too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir.
One last question. Are they willing to average the hours over the contract period? If 1 month was 60 and one was 40, would that fit in the 50?
No.
No, so they won't average.
No, that's just kind of what it is what it is, yeah. It'd be nice if they would, but. Yep.
All right, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Shit. Move on to the next one. Request to purchase used unmarked police vehicle. Chief Hedlund.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our department, for the chief, investigators, and then what we call a school car / training car, our department has typically used vehicles. Well into the past, they would use expired, formerly used squad cars. We have moved away from that and gone to just unmarked sedans. Began quite a number of years ago. Our current fleet that we're looking to replace at this point in time includes 2 2009 Chevy Impalas and a 2011 Chevy Impala that are all used by our investigation staff. We'd basically just like to update those with newer, still used vehicles, newer and lower mileage. Funding sources were detailed without full knowledge in my original RCA. I do have still not exact dollars, but very close dollars. With all the additions and subtractions that are listed in the original RCA, we come up with a total of just over $33,000. Final numbers from our recent auction that just ended this weekend are still, the exact dollars are still being figured out, but that's certainly within $100 or $200 of that amount. So roughly $33,000 plus the 2 trade-ins. So we would have a value of, in the ballpark of depending on what we get for trade, $36,000 to $39,000, somewhere in that range. So ballpark $12,000 to $13,000 per new used vehicle. Our intent would be to send out a request to a number of regional automotive dealers requesting 3, basically the best deal they can give us on 3 used sedans. It's basically non-budgetary, well, it's a budgetary item, obviously, but it's not money coming out of the budget. It was a very good year, I suppose you could say it, as far as asset forfeitures go. So we do have more money than is typically allocated for a department through that fund.
Good. Anybody have any questions for the chief? See none. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Number 7, discussion on new construction incentive program. Mr. Gorte.
Thank you, Mr. President. This came up a few weeks ago here and went back to the EDA for further discussion. And the EDA discussed at length the $5,000 new opportunity housing program. It's a program in which $5,000 forgivable mortgage is given to buyers of new homes in the community. And we've had discussions with realtors, and we've had internal discussions, and the question that the EDA was discussing was whether this actually helps to achieve sales. And the conclusion that the EDA came to is no, it does not. Therefore, the EDA is recommending that the program be terminated, that if in order to participate in the program, you must have closed, the lot must have been closed on by December 31st of this year, and there must be a certificate of occupancy by December 31st of next year.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Gorte?
We had, there's a similar program with the state of Minnesota and Polk County that they can get if they need money. It's more of a new home, first buyer type program. But we felt it was a duplication for us to have it and them to have it, so let's use their money instead of ours.
There is a Polk County Affordable Housing Program that allows people with incomes up to $89,000 to purchase used or new homes up to $220,000. That amount has just been increased from $140,000 to $220,000 to make it more available to people. There is dollars funded in that program, and I have information, and the Housing Office also has information to get people in touch with the, it's done through the Northwest Minnesota Multi-County HRA. We have information to get them in touch with there so they can take advantage of that program.
That's a forgivable loan also?
That is a mortgage that they have to repay. There are favorable terms, and it's been a program in place for some time. And I want to say there's something like perhaps $100,000 available. It's up to $10,000 per home. It's a down payment program, down payment assistance program. It's $10,000 per home. If you are buying a used home and there are appraiser required or bank required repairs, you can get an additional $2,500. It's 10% of the home value up to $10,000 that's available for that program.
Anybody else have anything? See none? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Number 8, Park and Recreation Staff Organizational Plan. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I think as you all are aware, Mr. Gulbranson is nearing retirement. He's done actively working, using up vacation time through the end of November until he gets to his actual retirement date. So we are down an employee right now. And before we post his position to hire, I've included a couple of draft job descriptions of ways that I'd like to see both his position, which was the VFW Arena Supervisor, and Mr. Brian Larson's position, which is the Civic Center Manager, Civic Center Supervisor, and Cemetery Supervisor position, basically to redraft them or rewrite them into having Mr. Larson be the supervisor of the maintenance in all 3 of the arenas, and then continue on with his cemetery supervisor duties as well. And then Mr. Gulbranson's position would essentially transition into an assistant supervisor position that would work under different hours of work than what Mr. Gulbranson did, and have a little bit of a different role in the duties, and that they'd work more on the operations side and a little bit less on the facility maintenance side. And I guess to explain a little further what I mean by that and how I see it is Under our old standard or under the current way we're set up, both Mr. Larson and Mr. Gulbranson got to work at 7 a.m. and stayed until 3:30 p.m., which during the winter, of course, as you all know, are times that the buildings are largely empty, which it's a necessary aspect of it. We need to have people there during those times that can do the ice maintenance. It takes us a significant amount of time, of course, at a time when there aren't people on the ice. But I think that with a chance to rewrite some things, it gives us a chance to have this assistant supervisor be there at a time when our other full-time employees are working, our part-time seasonal help are working, and they can have a little bit more of a supervisory role in the building when our employees are there and when customers are there, when the general public is there using the building, so that they get a little bit more of a view on it, a hands-on view of how are our part-time guys driving the Zamboni. Is there some hands-on training we can do with them on site, when things are happening? How are we maintaining bathrooms when there's an event going on? We have a large event in town, for example, at the Civic Center. We're going to have a couple thousand fans there that night. This assistant supervisor, I'd see them being there on a variable shift that day, where maybe they work from 1 p.m. to 9 p.m. that night. So when the building is super busy, we have an extra full-time supervisor that's there that we can feel comfortable about, that is, one, keeping an eye on the building and making sure that it's up to the standards that we want it to be in, and then two, making sure that the part-time staff that we have to have on for event management have a supervisor there that they can lean on when something comes up. So that's a kind of a short snapshot of a little bit of how I see it looking in the winter months. And of course I focus primarily on that because I think that's where the job needs the most flexibility, is during the ice season when we're in the buildings, in the ice arenas. Mr. Larson would oversee maintenance of all three buildings. Right now, he does the Civic Center and the Blue Line Arena. So largely we have the same practices and the same, even checklists of cleaning responsibilities and maintenance responsibilities in those buildings that they're not carried into the VFW arena because it's always been a different manager, and they each kind of manage their own way. This would allow us to have Mr. Larson's eyes and standards on all three buildings and let it have more consistency across the board. It would also take us one step closer to having employees that are cross-trained from a part-time standpoint, cross-trained in all three buildings, rather than having a stagnated group of, typically I always work at the Civic Center and typically I always work at the VFW arena and so on. This would allow us a little bit more flexibility in sliding those employees around as needed, making sure they're trained to be in all buildings at all times. So these positions, even though they look like every other job description you have with the city on a Springstead, look like that. They have not gone to Springstead. I took the old positions and redrafted them in a draft form so they look similar with descriptions of kind of how I see it laying out. But that would be the next step, is if you guys agree with the theory of what we're going for, then we'd have to send them off to be graded and pointed to figure out what the salaries would be before we could post anything. So,
anybody have any questions?
Answered my question.
Mine too. Pay scale.
You'd have been earlier.
Yeah.
Mr. Bitter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. My only question is dollars and cents. I like the layout, but is this going to save us money then?
I wouldn't plan for it without sending it. I don't want to say anything of what it's going to do for us saving money until we know what they're going to be graded and salaried. But the way that I see the positions is it doesn't give us any less employees. The only thing it may do, and I haven't put a real pencil to the schedule, is that it would ultimately, if we have one more full-time employee that's going to be there during business hours, it'd be one less part-time employee that needs to be there at that time. Again, I couldn't break down the math for you to show you exactly what that looks like. I haven't done that because largely I want to see what they're going to grade out at, and if it's even a realistic thought from there. But to carry that a little bit further, for example, right now, I can't even do it, never mind. I was going to say right now that the VFW arena, I have John Heffernan working typically he would have worked from 3:30 to 10:30 at night, and when Mr. Galbranson was working 7 a.m. to 3:30. Right now I have John working from 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., and then a part-time employee working the last 4 or 5 hours of each day of the week. That's how we're kind of mending the gap here until we can get this job figured out. So we're already kind of test running these varied hours a little bit to see what they look like and how the building performs. But I can't answer totally how it's going to line up for cost savings.
Because we don't have any more dollars. So if we approve this and you appoint them, now you might have 2 or 3 vacancies because we don't have it in the budget to fill those positions. And
I'm not asking for an increase in employees, though. It's basically, this is rewriting Dale Galbranson's position, which is, it would basically just be a change in the structure of the jobs a little bit. It wouldn't be an increase in jobs in any way.
Anybody else have any questions? Mark?
So, just to clarify, no net FTEs are 0.
Right.
Okay.
As is.
And the fiscal impact, we'll have to get some sort of a note on that, I suppose. What's the time frame for that?
Depends on how much I yell. Springstead is typically fairly busy, and realistically, if I do some heavy pushing, 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, maybe I could get it in 4 if I really push them on that. I guess as far as what the cost would be on this, they're gonna point it on based on the responsibilities at it. So the position that was formerly held by Mr. Galbranson, some of the responsibility of that will be decreased due to the fact that they're not the ultimate supervisor for that particular facility. But on the other hand, the other one will be adding the overseeing of that facility. So one will probably go up somewhat, and the other one will probably go down a little bit. Probably should be a wash.
Will that assistant supervisor still be able to direct work? Yes. That will be part of this. Thank you. I guess, obviously, I was wondering if there was some sort of a, pushing up and pushing down kind of, maybe it'll be somewhere in there, but I think we still need to see that before we get too far into it. But the other question, kind of goes, I like it because I think how we use our supervisor foreman time is important. And I think too often those people are doing stuff that we should be paying temporary or part-time people to do. You don't pay someone a supervisor salary to cut grass. Obviously, when it needs to be done, everybody's got to pitch in and do what they need to do. But I like the idea of fewer supervisors that oversee more people doing the labor, I guess. I don't like having your supervisor's foreman doing all the work, and I think you lose sight of the big picture when you're doing that, or the bigger picture. Ultimately, you're responsible for the big picture. Lastly, are we still employing the temp recreation? Didn't we have like a temporary rec coordinator, assistant, or something like that? Or what did we do with that position?
I would imagine you're talking about last year, Mike Peterson, the baseball coordinator.
Okay.
I understood he was a baseball coordinator. We had him employed this summer as a baseball coordinator again.
Okay. But he's still on right now, right?
For another day.
Okay.
Anything else, sir? Do you have anything?
There's one more comment. I guess one thing I'll say, I applaud Reid. He's done quite a bit of research in the short time that he's been here with, plus with what he's had going on in that department. I will say that he has taken some of the comments that he has received from staff, council, and the citizens that use the Parks and Rec to take a look at reworking this to how to best use what we have for resources. And one of the things that he had heard quite a bit, and one thing that he saw when he got here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the fact that particularly in the evening hours when practice is going on, and you know, the practice can go until 10 o'clock at night or more. Then when practice is going on, one of the things that they were looking for is to have somebody there that has some authority and longevity and some ability to get some of the stuff taken care of in there. So I mean, I understand about the idea of having a full-time person there, maybe helping with the bathrooms or whatever, but that's one of the things that we had received for complaints, is that it would be nice when they're in the evenings to have somebody there that actually can have some authority to get some things done and make some decisions. So I think he's done quite a bit of thorough looking into that to see how to approach that.
Anybody else have anything? Appreciate all the work you've done on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reid.
Number 9, severe weather policy amendment. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you. I'm trying not to do a solution in search of a problem here, but this is something that comes up every so often, and where I've noticed where I have some of the issues with is particularly with the when the school districts are 2 hours late, or they come in at noon, or the school is canceled. We get a lot of requests or comments about why the city hall isn't closed and that, and I wanted to formalize it and make a more clear policy than what I had to look at in the past. So in this particular case here, it would put forward that it's only be during times of the most severe inclement weather that the following policy would apply, and that it would be basically my call in conjunction with consulting with the council president, chief of police, and public works superintendent, basically whoever may be appropriate at that particular time, at that discretion to close that. And obviously this does not apply to emergency personnel.
Consulting with them.
Oh, he's one. Okay. This obviously does not apply to emergency personnel, nor does it apply to public works staff, particularly those that have to be there to plow snow. So what it is, what I'm looking at, so is if we do get to that point that it was called, this would apply to all Monday through Friday staff and Monday through Friday staff in the police department, and they would go home. They would be able to go home and be closed the same as we've done in the past, where they would then be paid their normal wages through that. We do have the provision in here. This is where I'm getting, is if the employee feels that the driving conditions are unsafe, they may opt to call in, and with the permission from their department head or supervisor, may take time off even if city offices have not closed. However, they would have to utilize some paid leave in order to do that. I did have a comment I guess, from the mayor as far as one item that he saw that might be missing here, and that would be on the case that if, in the event that we do close City Hall due to inclement weather and somebody was already on a paid day off, either vacation, time or whatever, what happens in that particular case? I hadn't thought about that particular case. I guess I would assume they would be, or what I would put in there is they would be treated as everybody else, and that time would not be charged against them.
Because to the old policy, it actually named it where if they were
The last line, last sentence, yeah, last two lines.
Employees on paid leave will still be charged with time off from the appropriate leave, vacation, sick leave, etc., if the leave occurs on a city-declared storm day. So that would just be a change in it was stated in the past that they would use their PTO, and the new policy is kind of silent on the issue. So I just thought we'd bring it out and make sure we know which way we're going on that.
I guess I'm not tied to it either way. If the council feels one way or the other, I'd put that in.
And I have no preference either, no preconceived idea, but just wanted to have the conversation.
Any thoughts on that? Mr. Vetter?
We're just going through negotiations with our unions. That would seem that would be one that would be in the union contract, wouldn't it?
Probably not the severe weather policy. I don't know, we'd have, I guess I wouldn't want to have, I gotta think about it, I wouldn't want to have separate severe weather policies for the different unions. My recommendation would be that we have an overall policy outside of the unions that would apply to everybody. That's just my recommendation.
I'm just wondering if we can do that.
Do what?
Can we have a separate policy outside of the union contract?
Oh, yeah. If the union contract doesn't specify, then the city's employee policy prevails. We run into this a lot. Yeah, so the personnel policy prevails if there's nothing in the contract.
Don't want to get in trouble.
Matter to me, because if they're got PTO and we close, no one's working, so we come against them.
How many times have we actually closed down totally? Not many.
Closed twice last year, and that was the first time. I don't think we
it's a
closed.
small occurrence.
The last couple of years before that, I don't believe we closed, but twice last year we had some. Then I think we had when the governor.
We'll find out Friday, right?
So it's been rare. I think it's happened. I think it's happened twice since I've been here, and I've been here 4 years.
If that's the kind of the consensus, is that if someone had scheduled vacation, they were having it taken out of their PTO, now it's a storm day and they're not here, and if the preference of the council is to have those hours go back into their PTO bank, let's just name it in here so we remember that that's what we wanted to do.
But it wouldn't actually come on yet because it wouldn't be until they turned in their timesheet after the event.
It wouldn't be taken off.
Yeah. And I guess, and I'll be quiet, really number 4 was the one that I was really kind of going after because I do get a lot of comments on that.
Anything else from Mr. Murphy on that?
Of course, the response to 2 hours late is, think about the kids, the kindergarten kids and all the kids trying to slog through blizzards, trying to get to school and buses, and that's a different standard to me. You think of a little first grader has to walk 2 blocks to school. That's a little different than an adult coming into City Hall to work. Absolutely, and that's all over the private sector as well. All clinics and banks and retail stores, and we'd all love to do that. Oh, school's 2 hours late, we'll be 2 hours late. And luxury.
So if, for instance, I'm on vacation this week, and there's a storm day, you're saying I get my time back?
For that day.
For that day.
Not your whole time back.
Well, I get it.
Not all of us get 3 weeks off.
I'm just curious.
See, that was the question that I raised, and it seemed like the consensus of the group was to not have it cost against PTO.
Mr. Hedlund, you have a question?
Just seeking a point of clarification, just trying to, and I'm not trying to stir the pot, just trying to prevent a problem down the road. Emergency workers are exempt from this clause, firefighters, police officers. How do you treat the police officer that's on vacation that you then have?
Call back in?
Well, let's just say they're on vacation wherever, and they're not available to call back in, but every other employee then got that day's vacation that they were going to take off. How do you treat the police officer, the firefighter, or the snowball out there?
So it's fair and equitable over here, but it's not fair over there.
I see what you mean.
Yep.
Water and light too.
Because I guess the way I look is because emergency personnel are exempt, they would have had to work anyway. So whoever filled in for them had to, they would have been there.
So I can just see the question coming up.
That's a good point.
Anything else? Entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Repel, second by Matrowski. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Meeting is adjourned.
You didn't think I was going to let you slide, did you? You can buy the popcorn tonight, Ron.
They started at 5:15. That's a VFW.
Yeah.
Yep.
I blame it on Mark.